All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of the CX Chronicles Podcast. Super excited for today's guest, Abby Hammer from ChurnZero. Welcome to the CX Chronicles Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
So I'm excited to have you too, Abby. This is going to be a fun one. Why don't you start off the show like we start off all these episodes? Give the CX Nation a couple minute elevator pitch for who you are and how you got into the position and the role that you're in today, building and leading an awesome company like ChurnZero.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the Chief Customer Officer and Head of Products at ChurnZero, which is an unusual combo, admittedly, one that is hopefully worked well for us in the last few years as we've grown a solution that is designed to help customer success managers more proactively and more efficiently manage their book of business. So we really cover all manner of customer engagements, from trying to build relationships to increasing product adoption to churn risk and reduction, health understandings. We really cover the gamut. And we even get into some more modern ways of communicating with your customers, like in-app content and collaborative spaces with your customers, which I think is super exciting as we think about the myriad of ways in which communication with customers can grow and expand. I've been at ChurnZero since the beginning. I'm employee number one here, so I've seen us grow in a lot of really exciting ways, and I've seen us go through a lot of evolutions of our own customer success understandings and practices, of which I am always happy to share with others.
I love it. Well, number one, I'm always pumped to have a fellow CX and CS nerd with me. But number two, you're employee number one at a company that I think most of our listeners today are probably intimately aware of who ChurnZero is, what type of products and solutions you've built, what type of customers you serve, and then more importantly, the beauty of the listenership on this show is like we're the guys and gals that have been tasked with thinking about portfolio management, thinking about frontline customer communications, thinking about all of the other fun modern ways of thinking about how like CX and CS is modern selling. This is dollars. This is revenue. This is how you can grow a company faster. This is how you can create an army of promoters. And this is how you can literally help your customers grow their business, grow their revenue. And if you're playing in that type of game, everybody knows what type of value and what type of runway a company like that has. So definitely excited to jump into it with you today. Abby, I'd love to start off with the first CX pillar team. Give us a sense for what the ChurnZero squad looks like today, and give us a sense for sort of how you built out the different players on the pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. So currently the customer success team at ChurnZero is made up of a couple of different sub-teams. So we do have our customer success managers. We also have our implementation specialists who are heavily involved with our customers at the very beginning of our relationship, doing technical implementations and technical integrations. We have our support team. I always say, success and support are two halves of one pie. You can't have one without the other. You can't be proactive if you don't have a great reactive arm. And then as we've grown and the needs of our customers have gotten more varied and more complex, we've introduced our professional services teams, a group we call our success consultants. We now have some roles on the team around solutions engineers to handle, more complex projects that might come up with our customers. And we think of all of those teams when we talk about customer success at ChurnZero. We think about all of those teams that are interfacing directly with our customers all the time, plus our enablement team. And that enablement team is focused on customer enablement. So things like our academies, our community. They're also focused on our internal enablement. So how we grow a team of CS geeks and get them really excited about what they do, know our product really well, know our customers really well, know our industry really well. Because that's a big expectation we get from the groups that choose to become part of the ChurnZero family. They want great solutions, but they also want great service and guidance. So we really think of all of those teams coming together as the customer success team. Only other thing I'd say is that at our current juncture, CSMs at ChurnZero do own the commercial relationship as well. They own the renewal. We own the majority of expansion, which is a bit unusual. A little bit of a dividing topic in our industry, but one that sort of plays into our perspective of if we do relationship building well, if we do product adoption well, if we do value realization well, renewal, expansion, those sorts of things, it's just crossing the T's, dotting the I's, as opposed to needing to be this sort of momentous part of the relationship.
I love it. And you know what? It's funny, Abby, like I think our friends on the south side of the aisle, they've been telling us this for decades, right? At the end of the day, customers stick around because of relationships. Customers stick around because of dependability. Customers stick around because if they have a guy or a gal that they're going to, and every time they have a question or a need or there's a challenge or struggle, they're getting fixes, they're getting quick answers, they're going to go buy from that person again in the future. And that's, again, that's why I think we're seeing this incredible evolution in the way that a lot of executive teams are thinking and investing in customer experience and customer success, because the reality is it's almost like there's been this huge light shined upon the fact that if you can keep your retention rates extremely high and your churn rates extremely low, growing a business really it's not that difficult. Don't get me wrong, there's a ton of bumps along the way.
Sure.
There's constant ups and downs every damn day of the week. Every one of us knows that. But the reality is like, it's also just fun to build a business and to build a team that has that baked into its DNA. So I love that. I do have a follow-up question for you on the team side. So you mentioned earlier too, the product part, and you know that I'm going to hit on this because I think most CX executives would salivate over your situation where you have connectivity to product. So being able to help oversee, lead, and just constantly be pushing and motivating customer success and customer experience, but then being able to just bring back the wins and bring back the learnings and findings straight to your other team on the product side. Can you spend a minute or two just talking about what that's kind of what that's looked like for you? And I'd love to kind of hear some of the benefits that you've been able to experience having that type of a setup.
Yeah, I will say there's a lot of, I believe in an organization where customer success sits at the middle, because that's another way of saying the customer sits at the middle if customer success is ultimately responsible for it. And customer success should have a lot of great partnerships in the org with just about every team, from sales to marketing to finance, all of that. If you're going to ask me, somewhat biasly, of course, who their BFF should be, it should be product. Because the fact of the matter is that when we come up to a renewal, people renew on services and on the solution. Yep. If they don't like your solution, even if they love you, they're not going to spend tens of thousands of dollars to be your friend. That's not how anything works. And if they love the solution, but to your point, they can't consistently rely on you for the things that live around your solution and support them around your solution, they're also going to go looking somewhere else. So it's really two pieces of the equation that have to come together. And I think in most organizations, even ones I've been a part of at previous lives, I think the biggest disconnect between product and CS is how they think and how they have to think in order to be good at their jobs. A customer success manager, that's traditionally going to be someone really high EQ, really relationship focused, really focused on helping people realize something that they're seeking for.
Yep.
Product, on the other hand, has to come from this more objective space. They cannot live and die by every single thing that happens to every single customer. They'll never make it. So I think a lot of the disconnect between those teams is how they share their insights, how they share their perspective, how they communicate with one another. I think if you ask those two teams what they want to accomplish, they're going to say the same stuff.
Yep.
And where we fall apart in partnership really comes down to how we go about discussing how we use each other to accomplish those things. And at a very high level, that's a role I serve between my two teams, is translator almost, bringing people on the product side closer to CS, bringing CS people closer to product, helping them understand where they may be talking past one another or really saying the same thing in a different way. And I think that's potentially a little easier to do through one human, but I also think it's wildly, wildly possible through two aligned leaders. And they probably wouldn't have the sort of angel and devil conversations I have all the time when I'm trying to make some different decisions based on whether I have my product leader hat or my success leader hat on. Yeah. But I think nurturing that relationship is incredibly important, because CS has a lot of meaningful insights for product. Product has a lot of good perspective for CS and good problem solving for CS. So I'm hoping that's a continued evolvement that we see in a lot of businesses, is how those two groups work together.
I think, Abby, you just nailed it. That's probably one of the biggest takeaways in general. Every CX and CS leader should be thinking about how product can become one of their very best friends. The other thing too is there's something really interesting about, you mentioned this, but when you talk about like the socialization or sharing tribal knowledge or cross-pollinating different SMEs across a business, any industry, by the way, Nothing is better than when you get a CX or a CS or a product person sitting around a set of customer inquiries or a set of customer requests, and even just being able to walk a CSM through, okay, super easy technical fix. We could bang this out in the next sprint. This is easy. Okay, this next question, this is really hard. Like, you need to let your customer know if they want this. Like, Google struggles with that, Apple struggles. And then, but my point is like, just even having that like regular communication, that internal discussion. Number one, it's just good EX and it's good employee experience, because then you got a team of people that are sharing each other, sharing ideas, collaborating. But number two, it's amazing how many companies don't leverage the ability of putting some of that golden information into their CSM or into their customer focused team's mouths, because that's the strategic partnership that we're talking about. Like, when you go back to that next customer phone call, you go back to that next email, and it's loaded with substance, it's loaded with knowledge, it's loaded with things that we can do or maybe can't do, or even better yet, hey, this is already on the roadmap. It's going to be done by XYZ date. We've already heard it from a number of customers. We're halfway through. Like, that is also phenomenal modern customer experience, being involved in that conversation, showing what's being done or what's being out there, and frankly, just helping to make sure that people understand sort of what's on the horizon from a product and from a customer experience perspective. So I love that stuff. I think it's awesome. And it must be fun, by the way, for you.
It is, it's really rewarding. I feel a little guilty sometimes, because I do get to have such an amazing experience on both sides of the house. And I think whether most people are not going to have my scenario, but you could easily get to something like my scenario through shared understandings, shared KPIs, ways that you communicate on things. I encourage every product team that if you're not talking to customers constantly, do it. Start it now. Like, you need to experience what the CS team experiences. You need to have a touch of that awareness as you think about things. Think about ways you can bring customer success, bring support, bring professional services into the process of developing a solution. Some of the best sort of litmus testing you're going to get as you develop a solution is to turn it towards your own team and say, like, poke some holes in it before we're done coding here.
100%.
And on the CS side, I tell people, you got to lead with the data. If you want to influence a PM, don't bring a story, don't bring an anecdote, don't bring your energy and your nerves. Bring your numbers. That's what's going to move the needle for product, and that's what's also going to move the needle for the business.
I love it. Abby, I'd love to jump into the second CX pillar of tools, and I think this fits nicely with what you just said, because every company out there is obviously, number one, they've probably already got a plethora of different SaaS solutions running their business. Some of them they probably love, some of them not so much. But those tools and those different solutions that we're all building our companies with, that gives us some of the numbers that you just finished talking about. Can you spend a few minutes talking about, as you and the team have really kind of grown and scaled ChurnZero, what are some of the tools that have been, just a super important part of that journey? And then definitely spend a minute or two talking about how your tool, how ChurnZero, is helping your customers, and it's helping all of the users out there in the world that are using ChurnZero have a better insight and have a better grasp of what's going on inside of their own business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with us. We use ChurnZero at ChurnZero. We drink our own champagne, and we have from the beginning. So we are in a bit of a unique scenario where most CS teams pick up, or ideally pick up, a CS platform or purpose-built platform for them a little bit further along in their maturity. We happen to have had it from day one, which has given us a lot of structure that a lot of teams are sort of building after the fact, which is fine, totally normal. It's also given us a shared space to work with product in terms of the numbers that we produce about customers, where they can go to understand a customer and to learn more about what interests them and what motivates them. So for us, ChurnZero is our main hub, and what it represents, and I'm not here to sell ChurnZero, so I'll try to do this more agnostically, is a CS platform represents a centralized hub for the CS team. And this is something that many other parts of the organization have. CS is still grappling for those same rights in some ways. Like, no CMO is out there explaining to their CEO why they need a marketing automation system. It's just like, of course you have a marketing automation system. No VP of sales or CRO is out there explaining why you need certain sales automation tools or sales reporting tools. Of course you do. It's mission critical to the business. And as we see our space, and as we see CEOs, CROs, their understanding of customer success shifting away from being a happiness team to being a revenue team,
Yep.
The same thing's got to be true for CS teams, is that they need a space that is purpose built for their workflows every single day, for the numbers they need to report on, for the tools that they need to manage their customers. And manage their customers and what those tools are can vary a little bit depending on whether you are a high velocity or a high touch CSM team, or maybe a mix of both. So that's really what ChurnZero is bringing to all of our customers who use us, is that centralization of data so you can make informed decisions. With that centralized data, you have a holistic picture of the customer. And even just in a one-on-one communication, there's no more showing up and being like, well, how are things going? What do you want to talk about today? Which is my biggest pet peeve. Don't ever show up to a meeting and do that.
Yes.
Like, you should have a reason for your existence there. So really sort of driving your customer conversations, and then helping teams be more proactive. It'd be great if we could each look at every single customer that we work with every single day and understand the nuances of what's going on with them. It's not practical. Yep. So how do we have solutions that help us, at scale, understand where someone is, where they may need help, and then react to that in a meaningful, timely, relevant way. And that's what ChurnZero is doing for the customers that use us.
Number one, it's awesome. Number two, I think you're right. When you talk about just like what types of resources, what types of tooling, what type of technology does each member of any executive leadership role need, you're right. Salespeople have always had their CRM, and maybe you have operative individuals that always have their ERP, or maybe you've got financial people that always have their FP&A tools. But we are finally in the spot where there's just, I think, across the board, or for most companies, thank God, there's this understanding, there's this agreement around the fact that like the people that are managing the portfolio and the people that are managing the customers that have already been brought down and have already been closed and are already paying customers, leading to our revenue every single day, allowing all of us to be here thinking about them as a customer, to have some of those additional insights, but more importantly, to be able to create meaningful, digestible calls to action on the insights. That's a game changer. And I think that Number one, this is why you see so much investment getting fueled into our space right now. But this is also why you have companies like ChurnZero that are killing it, and they're making a ton of happy customers, because this stuff's hard to build it manually, or to try to draw it just from a CRM, or just from an issue resolution management system, or just from a telephonic system. It's not that easy. Like there's a tremendous amount of aggregation, assessment, compartmentalization. Then you got to do the whole game of how do you get a bunch of smart people to know what to do with that information.
Absolutely.
And it's a pretty awesome solution, but more importantly, you guys picked a hell of a space to really be able to help so many growing businesses think about what's important as they scale into the future. What about the second part, Abby? I'd love to know, as you guys were building the business, building the team, building the portfolio, what are some of the other tools that really kind of help that process and help that growth process and help keep the train on the tracks?
So we certainly have a CRM here at ChurnZero as well. We happen to use Salesforce, and one of the big things that ChurnZero does is communicate with a CRM, whether it's Salesforce or others, because most businesses are going to need a sort of central source of truth in order to organize what they're doing as an entire business. So that was the other, for us here as a CS team, that was the other main tool we use. Now our support team uses other tools, to do ticket management and that sort of thing. But we've really challenged ourselves here at ChurnZero to exclusively drink our own champagne, I should say, is because when we find spaces, as we found spaces as we've grown, where we've said, oh, gee, I really wish ChurnZero would do X. That means we've got customers out there thinking that exact same thing. And that means that our product roadmap comes from a really natural place, because you've got a team behind it that is you trying to use it to its fullest advantage. And so they're the first ones that are going to come up with great ideas about how we could continue to grow.
Yep. I love it. Abby, I'd love to pick your brain on the third CX pillar of process. So we've talked about team, we've talked about tools. What are some of the things that you learned along this journey in terms of how the ChurnZero team has been able to, number one, just document and capture and constantly chronicle the different things that are going on internally and externally with their business? And how have you guys, as you've grown the business, thought about keeping or curating or even just controlling and monitoring the evolution of your playbooks or your SOPs or some of the processes that guide the day-to-day business?
Yeah. So as all great things in life, with process, moderation is your friend. I have seen people go to, none is bad, but you can also go in the other direction. And I think all CS teams go through a period where they go too far in the other direction. They start from nowhere, then they get excited about the possibilities and they over-engineer. We've gone through that same period as well. So the most important thing you can do, I believe, as you're growing, and something we try to do really routinely here at ChurnZero, is to have very purposeful moments where we step back and analyze. And you can't analyze the whole thing. If we analyzed every single process we have from start to finish, that, we do nothing else. So sort of rotating through what we do, like, hey, let's focus on implementation right now. Where can we refine there? Let's focus on our renewal process. Let's focus on our product adoption angles, and continually refine. Because the fact of the matter is that it cannot be a set it and forget it. As your team changes, as your customers change, as your product changes, you have to adapt to that. What looked like success for a ChurnZero customer 3 years ago would be a horrifically unhealthy customer now. So if I never changed my, if I never looked at my health again and sort of just left it and said, well, it was good 3 years ago, it must still be good now, I'd be making poor decisions as a leader. So another way to say this is that I think probably sooner than most groups think of, I believe customer success operations has to become a thing, a defined role, not a thing that a leader does on the side when they have time and when there aren't 16 other fires that they're trying to put out, but an actual defined role that they do. And again, I'll go back to marketing and sales here. Marketing has ops, no one questions it. Sales has ops, no one questions it. And it's because you need a particular mindset, a particular skill set to do it well. And as your team grows, as your customer base diversifies, as you try to do more, you need someone who's solely focused on that and making sure you have good feedback loops, good data analysis on what's working versus not. So that's usually one of the biggest pieces of advice I give to other CS leaders is find ops before you are very convinced you need it. If you wait until you're like, oh, we need it, now you're digging out of a hole. Yeah. So try to avoid dipping into that hole in the first place. And you can save yourself and your CSMs a lot of trouble.
I love that piece of wisdom, Abby. And I think you're absolutely right. So a couple of things. Let's start with just the different lenses of being too draconian with your process or your playbook curation, or doing nothing at all. Like finding that middle spot is absolutely like your number one starting point goal. Like you got to have something. It could literally, I tell our clients at CXC all the time, it can literally be a few pages, even though it could be somebody has spent 3 or 4 or 8 years of their lives thinking about this every day. So it can easily be like a complete, War and Peace type of book size playbook. But even if it's just a 3 to 5 page on things that you have to know about the team, or things that you have to know about tools, the processes, the feedback. I think same thing, customer lens versus employee lens, having simple views on things that you need to understand about our customer or our ideal customer profile or tendencies with the customer. Same thing on the employee side. Here's common problems that our developers have, common problems that our support teams have. Like that type of stuff is super, super helpful for people just having compass views. They at least kind of directionally have an idea of where they need to go. The other piece though that you mentioned that I absolutely love, and it's funny because I've been very much pounding this drum the last several months myself, but I'm getting to the point in my own CX and CS nerd journey where developing, inserting, and investing in CX and CS ops as early as possible is probably the easiest way that you can optimize all of the 4 CX pillars at the exact same time. Because the minute that you get sound reporting, visibility, to your point earlier in the call, making sure that you're constantly following and reporting on the numbers, because all the other feelings and the human elements, they are important because it's part of the art. It's definitely part of the art. Absolutely. But if you're building your story or building your painting or building your piece of artwork based on math and numbers, nobody's going to disagree with what that plot looks like. And it's just a much easier way of getting things done faster. The last part is this. It's incredible to me how many incredible companies that are killing it, companies that are doing over $100 million of annual revenue, who they miss the fact that there are other gains that come from that CX and that CS operations. For example, agent utilization, customer segmentation, some of the other intricate parts that go into a playbook or go into your processes, you get the answers from the CX and the CS operations managers that can actually show us and prove and validate these insights. And
Absolutely.
You're right. It's like, this is one area of, for our listeners, if you haven't already invested in this area for your team, don't think about the next 3 or 4 or 5 CSMs. Think about maybe two CSMs and 1 CX ops manager, and start there and see if you even need to go to the 4th or the 5th, because it's almost like a missile control or missile defense add-on to your team. You get this whole level of intelligence that makes your team more powerful.
Absolutely. And I tell people also, efficiency and accuracy of those CSMs is the number one reason to get CS ops, because we're all trying to do as much as we can with what we have for the benefit of our customers. So CS ops is all about capitalizing on that. But the other time I tell people, hey, you might want to start thinking about CS ops, is when they feel like what they do as a customer team doesn't have a place in the org. People don't understand it, they don't recognize it, or even worse, they're not benefiting from it. There's a lot of lip service going around about being customer centric.
Totally.
And I think sometimes in customer success, we're like, well, we're not part of the problem because we deal with customers all the time. You are, if you are not the constant source of customer insights to every other part of the organization. And CS ops it usually is the main owner of that. So it's great to be super well organized and super efficient. I believe modern CS will be defined by the fact that CS will be the most operations driven part of the organization, the most efficient part of the organization. But it also serves a really great purpose in making sure that your company can be customer centric, because you are constantly proactively democratizing those insights about your customers to product, to marketing, to sales, to finance, whatever it is. So those are the sort of 2 signals that it might be time to start thinking about ops.
I love that. And literally perfect segue into the 4th and final pillar of feedback, because you're right. I think selfishly, this is probably one of the best parts of any CX or CSR's job, Abby, right? We get to put our hands in every part of the business. But like the best CX and CS leaders and some of the companies that are absolutely crushing it and creating this incredible, world-class customer experience for success roadmaps and playbooks, they just did the last part you said. They democratized they democratized the hell out of that feedback. Everybody from the top of the business to the bottom of the business knows about what that drumbeat or what that pulse from the customer is. Obviously, we've all seen just so much new work about the voice of customer reporting, voice of customer dashboard, voice of customer task force, customer centricity. Everyone's got different terms for this stuff, but like, this is why it's so critical. I'd love for you to spend a few minutes talking about some of the details for how you guys do leverage your customer feedback. And I'd love to hear some ideas for how you guys leverage some of the employee feedback at ChurnZero to be able to make this thing crank every single day.
Yeah, so I'll speak first from a product perspective, since that's the other half of the hat that I wear. So we have a system at ChurnZero for anybody to submit product feedback. It could be a prospect, it could be a customer, it could be an employee. We don't care where the feedback comes from. We want it. Because then that gives that product team a very rich environment to work in, instead of guessing what people want or trying to decide like, would A or B have a bigger impact to the business? Now you can tie things to actual numbers, to deals won or lost, renewals, lost or won or even expanded. It starts to allow the product side of the business to make very business-driven decisions when you have a good method of collecting that feedback and then using it. Businesses are always going to make some decisions about where they go with their product roadmap, where you're trusting more than following things you already see. You're leaping into the abyss here a little bit, but in general, if you want a roadmap that feels customer centric, customer driven, that is likely to make your employees happy, really coming from that feedback is huge. I also think it's interesting because I think that when I talk about product and CS being BFFs, I think it's because they have a lot of the shared responsibilities on voice of the customer, on product adoption, so instead of seeing those as battlegrounds of who's going to win and get to own that, it should become, compromising opportunities where we can feed off of one another. In terms of other teams, finance, if you are an actual revenue team, finance is going to be really interested and should be really interested in just about everything you say, because the most important thing they can have is perspective. Is an idea of what is coming. If there are ever going to be bumps in the road, those bumps are less horrific if you knew they were coming versus if you were riding along in the car and everything seemed fine. And then, you sort of go over your speed hump here. So real insight into the health of the business and how that relates to dollars is a huge thing for finance. So if you haven't already spent time with your CFO, figuring out what numbers he needs from you, definitely do that. For sales and marketing, it's a little bit more straightforward, but super, super powerful. When you have voice of the customer programs, you can then use those to find your advocates, build, good referral programs, build good reference programs that really help on the marketing and on the sales side. It's also a great opportunity. I think sometimes CS feels like the victim in the situation around customer fit. Like, oh my God, sales gave us another, it's like, and I mean, look, it's going to happen sometimes, but if we talk about bringing together finance and marketing and sales and CS, if CS says, all right, here are the customers, here's the profile of customers that we renew and we expand, here's the profile of customers that we lose.
Yep.
You are suddenly going to have a lot more say in what fit looks like and how it develops than what you have previously. So, it's a good opportunity to positively influence on the classic tension points between sales and marketing and sales and CS.
I couldn't agree more. And Abby, what you just highlighted, this is another prime example for how it's just in today's world, CX and CS is a team sport. It is not just on us as the customer experience or customer success individuals. This is all encompassing. I think this is one of the reasons why you do see so much content and you do see so many, incredible customer focused business leaders talking about the idea of a holistic customer journey. Because when you think about, or just even for our listeners, imagine a customer journey or think about the last customer journey map that you looked at. Abby, you just nailed it. It's like, from the very point of awareness to how somebody even becomes aware that a brand or a product or a service is out there, your CMO starts there. Then you got to pull them into the pipeline, right? Now you got consideration. Maybe you're thinking about converting. You're doing the sales process. Now your CRO or your head of sales is in there. Now you get them across the line and they're ready to rock and roll. They're ready to onboard. And now this is what's interesting about your world, Abby. This is technically, you're right. This is one of the coolest takeaways from today's show. This is typically where the CS side, right? And the CX side starts to take over. But if you're a software company or if you're a technology company, this is where product adoption, stickiness, retention, and I would argue, I've been using this fourth term of mastery sets in. Because if you want to really rip out your LTV and max it out, you need to help your users become masters of the tool. If they master the tool, it's a daily thing. They're using it every day. They're using it. They're fully utilizing it. They're going to enrich all of the reporting and the dashboards that they can pull out of the back end because it's being used properly. That's incredible. And then this stuff goes all the way through product, analytics, finance. So the point is whether it's if your company already doesn't have some type of a group, again, at CXC with our clients, we call them our voice of customer task force, but knighting individuals from each one of these camps and immediately bringing them around the table to think about how you can expand the way that you're doing your voice of customer reporting or your customer feedback digest curation, whatever you guys are calling it. Company's got a different way that they want to kind of brand this. And that's what's cool about this is it's pliable. You can come up. Yeah. And some companies, they do an awesome job of turning that right around to their customer base, Abby. And they do here's what we heard from you customers, and here's what we worked on for the last 90 days. And people love that stuff. It's inclusive. It feels like customers feel like they've got their blueprints all over, or their thumbprints all over it. And then employees feel like they got their thumbprints all over it. And that's where you're really kind of starting to balance that CX and that EX to make a super, super awesome situation. So all super cool stuff there. I have to ask you, has there been in your journey, one or two things that you would suggest to our listeners when it comes to feedback? What are the one or two things that have worked the best for you, whether it's surveys, one-on-one conversations? Well, has there been one or two things that you already know have worked the best for you as a customer focused business leader?
I'm going to dodge the question slightly and say that I do think it's situational depending on what you're trying to get feedback on. So for example, very common after a support ticket to send CSAT. I think that's a perfectly good way to collect feedback. It's very, transactional. The feedback is focused. It's quick and easy to give. And you can get real information out of that survey. What percentage felt good about it? What percentage didn't? And then if you're willing to comb comments, you can find themes in those comments. So there are scenarios in which surveys work really well. In general, if you need to know something more than can be answered in one or two questions, I feel like the more you can lean towards listening tours and interviews,
Yes.
the better. And I
Totally.
think sometimes we think like, oh, well, product's a small team, or there's this many customers and the product team's only this big, or same with CS. I think you can sort of leverage all of your resources. If everybody knows what we're asking for, and the goal is really to go and listen, not to change minds, not to convince or anything like that, but rather to absorb and to bring back information, I think a huge group of people can go and help with that. You'll want to try to approach those things in a way that makes the results more than just totally qualitative, where now you have to read through thousands and thousands and thousands of words to get understanding. So it is definitely a balance. But I think in general, the more we can talk to people directly, the more exposure we get to the language that they use, the nuances of tone and direction and where a thought travels, because you are getting to the human behind it, as opposed to just the check mark on a survey. I think surveys serve a really important purpose, but a really controlled purpose in my experience.
I love that. That's fantastic advice. And I couldn't agree more. I think we're going to see a big change in that too, Abby. I think there's going to be a lot of customer focused executives that start thinking about the leveraging the customer listening tour, customer scorecarding. Obviously, so many CSM groups have gotten fantastic at the way that they do their monthly reviews, their quarterly business reviews. So we've already done a ton of awesome things in terms of evolving this whole space that direction. But the last thing is this: when you bring it down to its simplest form too, it's like conversation, it's listening, it's learning, and that's what builds relationships over time, right? It's that those are the activities at the simplest sense that make another human feel really good about working with a product or a solution.
I agree with you, but I actually want to bring in something else that you said here on mastery. So I think this is sort of to me, relationships, and I say this as a person who's been in CS for a long time now, relationships are a double-edged sword. If your relationship is based too much on the individual, it's a weak foundation on which to build your house. So if I had a customer who's like, we love Abby, we love no one else but Abby, and that's the only person we ever want to talk to.
Yeah.
If I win the lottery and I move to the Bahamas, now what happens to that relationship? Or I get a new POC. I mean, how many of us have struggled with a customer who got a new leader constantly? Yeah. So when we think about relationship, I think we need to think about how we build relationship through understanding challenges, understanding goals, understanding intent, and have that be the foundation of interactions, but have it not be necessarily associated with just a single human. Because I think single humans, particularly in the environment we're in right now with the job market and everything like that, single humans are a shaky ground on which we stand. So I think that's what CS needs to get our mind around, is how do we build relationships that are very human, but also don't require a specific human, if that makes any sense. And that's it's a problem I'm like trying to noodle through in my own head, but I think that is going to be the crux of how we figure out modern CS, is keeping the human element without requiring necessarily the specific individuals that are there.
So that is a super interesting whole. We could have a whole other show on this topic right here, Abby. But the one thing that you immediately make me think about is, like, for our listeners, leveraging your feedback and thinking about how you can build the future of your customer success planning or your customer success approach with each account. That's how you get to where Abby's saying, where then it's not about the superhero CSM, although we all love to be that way.
Love a good superhero CSM. We do.
But you're right. It gets back to process. It gets back to consistency. It gets back to the platform or the tool doing the things, you're keeping the guardrails for the customer. And that's where the value comes from. That's where all of the consistency comes from. So I love it. Abby, this has been absolutely fantastic. Before we wrap up today's show, I want to make sure, number one, any other things you want to call out about things that are going on with you and the team at ChurnZero, anything you want to call out about some of the things you're working on? And then number two, where can people find out more about you and more about the team?
Yeah. So I guess from the ChurnZero front, I'll say we are incredibly lucky to be growing really fast. So if you're a CS nerd and you want to hang out with a lot of CS nerds, we have lots of different customer positions that are open. We're always looking for talented folks to join the team. So if you're interested, definitely visit our careers page and take a look there. As for me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm underneath our ChurnZero page. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. I tell people I get too geeked out, too excited. So give me opportunities to get geeked out with you, and I'll be really excited. So
well, that's why this has been an absolute pleasure for me, because it is super fun to have these types of conversations with someone that's equally excited. Plus, you guys are killing it, Abby. So keep it the fantastic work, and we're going to look forward to seeing what you and the team at ChurnZero do in the near future.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a great convo.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Abby.